What if the most damaging words spoken to a child weren't the ones that came with raised fists, but the quiet ones whispered afterward by the one person who was supposed to protect her? My name is Sarah. I'm 26 years old. I'm a nurse at a small community hospital in Lafayette, Indiana. And before I tell you what happened at that church ceremony in front of 200 people, the night that changed everything, I need to take you back to a cold bathroom floor when I was 14 years old. I was sitting with my back against the bathtub, pressing a wet washcloth to my ribs. The tile was cold through my jeans. The single bulb above the mirror buzzed faintly. I didn't cry. I had learned early that crying only made things worse. Then the door opened. My mother, Carol, stepped inside. She sat down on the edge of the tub, and for a moment she just looked at me. Not at the bruises, not at my hands still trembling against the cloth. She looked at my face. Then she whispered, "You know how to push your father's buttons. Why do you keep doing this to yourself?" That was it. No, are you okay? No, he had no right. Just that. Quiet, practiced, almost gentle. I had heard some version of that sentence every single time for as long as I could remember. And for 18 years, I believed her. I believed I was the problem. If you had driven past our house on Birchwood Drive, you would have seen exactly what my father wanted you to see. A white brick colonial with green shutters, a lawn so even it looked measured with a ruler. And it might have been. A Chevy Silverado washed every Saturday morning before anyone else on the street was awake. A flag on the porch, a wreath on the door, that changed with every season. Robert Hale was a deacon at Cornerstone Baptist Church. He owned a small construction company, about 18 workers. He coached Little League for 3 years, not because he loved baseball, but because the parents in those bleachers were the same people who sat on the town zoning board. Everything Robert did had an audience. Every audience had a purpose. My mother, Carol, was the woman who always showed up to church potlucks with a warm casserole and a cardigan buttoned to the collar. Her voice was so soft it seemed like she was afraid of taking up too much air in a room. She called every man sir and every woman sweetheart. And then there was me, the quiet girl in the third pew every Sunday, hands folded in my lap, wearing long sleeves in July. Nobody asked why. Not once. The first time I remember it clearly, I was 10 years old. I had forgotten to wash the dishes after dinner. Not refused, just forgotten. I was doing homework at the kitchen table. Robert came in from the garage, pulled out his chair slowly, and set both hands flat on the wood. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that doesn't need to rise to fill a room. "Sarah, come here." The bedroom door closed behind us. I'm not going to tell you what happened next. I'll only say that the next morning, I counted 3 bruises beneath my left ribs. My little brother Dylan, 4 years old, was in the living room watching cartoons while it happened. Robert never touched him, not once. It took me 14 more years to fully understand why. 20 minutes after Robert's truck backed out of the driveway, my mother came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed. She placed her hand on the blanket. Not on me, just beside me. And she looked at my face and said, "Your father doesn't like dirty dishes in the sink. You know that." I looked back at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know which one of us needed comfort more. That sentence, "You know how to push his buttons," became the soundtrack of my childhood, and for years I believed it. But belief, I would learn, is a fragile thing, and paper has a longer memory than people do. Before I turned 16, I had been to the emergency room 4 times. Each visit ran the same script. Carol drove. Robert sat in the passenger seat, calm and composed, his hand resting on my shoulder like a father in a made-for-TV movie. When the intake nurse looked up from her clipboard, Carol would smile that soft, practiced smile and say, "She's always been clumsy, trips over her own feet since she was little." Robert would stand there smelling like Old Spice and fresh sawdust, nodding with just the right amount of fatherly concern. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? He was a church deacon. He coached Little League. He looked exactly like the kind of man you trust, without asking why. The 4th visit was different. I was 13. Dr. Patricia Owens walked into the exam room, looked at my arm, flipped back through my chart, and then did something none of the other doctors had done. She looked directly at me. Not at my parents. At me. "Sarah," she said quietly, "is anyone hurting you?" The question hung in the air for what felt like a full minute. And in that same instant, I felt Robert's hand tighten on my shoulder from behind. Not hard enough for her to see, just hard enough for me to feel exactly what my answer needed to be. "I slipped on the stairs," I said. Robert added with an easy smile. "I keep telling her, no running in socks." Dr. Owens wrote something in my chart without responding. I watched the pen move across the page and thought, I genuinely wondered whether whatever she was writing would ever find its way back to me. Years later, I found out it read, "Injuries inconsistent with reported mechanism of injury. Recommend CPS follow-up." Child Protective Services never came. Robert Hale knew everyone in that town. A note in a chart was just a note in a chart. By the time I was 16, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait to be saved. I was going to save myself, $1 at a time. I walked into Grant Pharmacy on Elm Street, asked to speak to the manager, and got myself a job at $9.75 an hour, bagging prescriptions 3 afternoons a week. I hadn't asked Robert's permission. I'd asked my school counselor to sign the work permit instead, and told him it was for college savings. Robert found out within 5 days. He came to the dinner table that evening, sat down, and said in that conversational tone that somehow always felt colder than shouting, "No daughter of mine needs to work. People will think I can't provide for my own family." His voice was steady, his eyes were not. I kept the job. I kept every dollar folded into a shoebox tucked behind a stack of old textbooks under my bed. After 7 months, I had $480. Enough, I had calculated, for a security deposit on the smallest apartment 2 towns over. My mother found the shoebox once. She was standing in my room when I came home, just staring at it on my desk. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between recognition and grief. Like she was looking at a version of herself who had made a different choice at 22. Then she turned and walked out without touching it. 3 days later, Robert found it. He carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and counted every bill slowly and deliberately while I stood in the doorway and watched. Then he folded the money into his wallet and said, "Anything earned under this roof belongs to this household." That night, I started hiding cash inside a box of tampons in the bathroom cabinet, and I started counting days. At 17, I applied to the nursing program at Ivy Tech Community College, using the library computer at school. I rented a P.O. box for $13 a month and had everything sent there. It was careful. It was quiet. And it almost worked. A financial aid summary was accidentally sent to the house, the kind of mistake that costs everything in a home like mine. Robert brought the envelope to the dinner table one evening, set it down beside the salt shaker, and waited until everyone had their forks in hand before he opened it. He read it once, then he looked at me with something almost like curiosity, and said, "You think you're leaving?" He tore the letter into 4 clean pieces and laid them neatly beside his plate, like they were part of the place setting. Carol kept cutting her meat. Dylan, 11 years old, stared at his plate. Nobody spoke. That night, I got under my blankets with my phone and called the admissions office. I kept my voice barely above a whisper. "The original letter was damaged," I said. "I need a replacement copy." There was a pause on the other end, and then the woman said gently, "We can send it wherever you'd like, sweetheart." I gave her the P.O. box number. On my 18th birthday, Robert left for a job site at 7 in the morning. I had checked his schedule the night before. A commercial renovation 40 minutes away, back no earlier than 6 in the evening. I had 2 suitcases, a backpack, and my friend Amber's car idling at the curb. When I carried the first bag through the kitchen, Carol was standing at the sink with her back to me, washing a dish that was already clean. She said, without turning around, "If you leave, who's going to help with dinner?" It wasn't about dinner. We both knew that. It was the only way she knew how to say "please don't go," without admitting why she needed me to stay. Because if I was in that house, I was the one absorbing everything. If I left, it would have to land somewhere else. I set the suitcase by the door and walked to Dylan's room. He was 12, sitting on the edge of his bed, trying very hard not to cry. I knelt down in front of him and held both his hands. "I'm coming back for you," I said. "I promise." He didn't ask me to stay. Even at 12, he understood that staying meant something worse than missing me. I hugged him, picked up my bags, and walked to the front door. Carol never turned around. I didn't look back until I was already in Amber's car, and when I did, I saw my mother's hand pressed flat against the living room curtain. For 1 second it stayed open. Then it fell. I walked out of that house with 2 suitcases and a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. What I didn't know yet was that leaving was only the beginning, and that the hardest phone call of my life was still months away. 3 weeks after I left Birchwood Drive, I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment with my back against the wall. The mattress was on the ground. There was one lamp I had found at Goodwill for $4, and a set of curtains from the IKEA clearance rack that didn't quite reach the bottom of the window frame. It wasn't much, but that evening, in the middle of doing nothing at all, I noticed something I had never experienced in 18 years of living in that house. Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes before a door slams or a voice drops low. Just silence. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe. The kind that simply exists without warning you about what comes next. I sat in it for a long time. Then my phone rang. Carol's name on the screen. I stared at it through 2 full rings before I picked up. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the apartment or the job, or whether I was eating. She went straight to it. "Your father isn't sleeping. He's not eating. The house feels wrong without you, Sarah. You're tearing this family apart." I closed my eyes for just a second. "You watched him tear me apart for 18 years and never said a word," I told her. "Don't call me to say I'm the one breaking something." There was a silence on the line. Not the good kind. And then a click. She hung up. That was the last time I heard her voice for 6 months. Those 6 months, I built a life out of small, deliberate things. I finished my first year of nursing school with a 3.8 GPA. I worked night shifts at Ridgewood Care Center, coming home at 6 in the morning with a permanent knot between my shoulder blades that never fully went away. My apartment had a small cactus on the windowsill, a secondhand bookshelf I had sanded and repainted myself, and my scrubs hanging on a drying rack beside the radiator. None of it was impressive, but every single object in that room was something I had chosen, and that made it more mine than any bedroom I had ever slept in on Birchwood Drive. I tried calling Dylan 4 times. The first 3 went to voicemail. The 4th time, a text came back from Robert's number. "Do not contact this phone again." He had taken Dylan's phone. Of course he had. You cannot control a boy if his sister keeps reminding him there is a world outside that house. Then one evening I made the mistake of opening Facebook. The Cornerstone Baptist page had posted a new photo, Robert grinning wide, his arm around Pastor Mark, standing beneath a banner that read, 2024 Man of the Year nominee, Robert Hale. Carol had commented from her account, "So proud of this man and this family. God is so good." Attached to the post was a family photo from 8 years ago. I recognized it immediately. 4 people, except someone had cropped it. Now there were 3. I zoomed in on the empty space where I used to be, a gap just wide enough for one person, and I stayed there, staring at it, longer than I want to admit. I turned off the light and lay in the dark and asked myself something I had never allowed myself to ask before. Had I ever actually existed in that family, or had I always just been a problem they were working around? A week later, a coworker named Diane stopped me in the break room during a shift change. She looked uncomfortable before she even opened her mouth. "Hey, I heard you've been going through some family stuff. Someone from your church mentioned something, and I just wanted to check in." She trailed off, embarrassed. I recognized it immediately. The shape of Robert's version of events hidden underneath her words. He hadn't just been managing the story inside Cornerstone Baptist. He had pushed it out further, into the hospital, into the place I had built for myself. In a town of 15,000 people, reputation travels faster than truth. And Robert had spent 30 years laying his foundation one handshake at a time. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in November, close to 11 o'clock. My phone lit up with Carol's name. I almost didn't answer. Some part of me, the part that had spent 6 months learning how to breathe without flinching, wanted to let it go to voicemail. But I picked up. What I heard on the other end wasn't the careful, measured voice my mother had used my entire life. It was something I had never heard from her before, raw and unsteady, the sound of someone who had held something inside for so long that it had finally broken the container. "Sarah, please don't hang up. Please." I didn't speak. I just held the phone. "He started hitting Dylan," she said. "After you left." The room tilted. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress to steady myself. "When?" I asked. "Slowly at first," she said. "Pushing. Grabbing. Then Dylan talked back about going to a school party with his friends and your father. He hit him, Sarah. Hard. The way he used to." She couldn't finish the sentence, but we both heard what came after the silence. Then she said something I had replayed in my head 1,000 times as a child, never once believing I would actually hear. I recorded it, his voice, everything he said. "Sarah, I was wrong. About all of it. I am so sorry." I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark and felt something crack open inside me. Not relief, not forgiveness, something harder to name than either of those. Like watching someone you had given up on take one single step in the right direction and not knowing whether to feel hope or grief for every step that never came before it. "Send me the file," I said. "Tonight. And don't delete it." It arrived at 11:52. 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. I had the recording. I had the truth. What I didn't have yet was a way to make 200 people hear it, and Robert had a 3-decade head start on the story. The morning after Carol sent me that file, I called a legal aid office 2 counties over, far enough that no one would recognize the Hale name, and made an appointment. The attorney, a woman named Karen Mitchell, listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You have options, but your father is ahead of you on the narrative. And in a small town, the narrative is everything." She was right. Because while I was sitting in her office taking notes, Robert was already working the room. Word had quietly spread through Cornerstone Baptist that Sarah Hale had gone off the rails, that she was unstable, possibly using substances, that her parents had tried everything and she had thrown it back in their faces. He hadn't announced it. He never announced anything. He simply mentioned it in the right conversations, to the right people, in that low and reasonable voice that made everything he said sound like reluctant concern. Then Pastor Mark called me. His tone was warm and pastoral, but underneath every question I could hear the exact shape of my father's words. "Sarah, your dad mentioned you've been going through a really difficult time. Is there anything the church community can do for you?" I thanked him. I told him I was fine. I hung up. And I sat very still for a moment, because I understood exactly what was happening. If I stayed silent, Robert's version would become the only version. Not because it was true, but because it had been told first, and told well, to people who already wanted to believe it. His voice was warm, the voice he used at church barbecues and town council meetings, the one carefully designed to make you forget what else he was capable of. "Sarah, sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but the church is doing a Man of the Year dinner next Saturday. 200 people. I want the whole family up on that stage together. Pastor Mark thinks it would be a really meaningful moment. The prodigal daughter comes home. People love that kind of story." I understood immediately what this was. Not an olive branch, a stage direction. If I refused, he would tell everyone, "See, she's too far gone. Even her own father can't reach her." If I showed up and played along, I would walk directly into his frame and disappear inside it, and every rumor he had planted would be confirmed by my own presence and my own silence. Either way, he won, unless I came with something he wasn't expecting. "I'll be there, Dad," I said. There was a pause, and then he exhaled, relieved, satisfied, already picturing the room. "That's my girl." I set the phone down on the kitchen table. My hands were completely still. It was the first time in my life I had ended a conversation with my father without trembling. The next morning, I drove to Meridian County Hospital. I knew the building. I knew the hallways. I was a nurse. I understood medical records infrastructure better than most people realize. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Under federal law, every patient has the legal right to request their own medical records. No court order, no attorney, just a signed authorization form and a valid ID. The Health Information Management Office was in the basement. Fluorescent lights, beige carpet, a front desk stacked with file boxes. The woman behind it was in her 60s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a name tag that said Ruth. I told her what I needed. Emergency department visits. All of them. Going back to childhood. She typed my name into the system, and then she stopped. She took her glasses off slowly and looked at me. Really looked. The way almost no one in this town had looked at me when I was 10, or 12, or 14. I remember your name, she said quietly. 5 ER visits before you turned 16. I always wondered what happened to that little girl. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She put her glasses back on and turned to her screen. Standard processing is 7 to 10 business days. Then she paused. The ceremony at Cornerstone, that's this Saturday, isn't it? I nodded. She looked at me one more time. Small town, she said simply. Records will be ready Thursday. Thursday night, I spread all 5 pages across my kitchen table. The language was cold and clinical. Dates, injury descriptions, physician observations, but every line said what no one in my family had ever been willing to say out loud. I sat there past midnight, and for the first time I let myself ask the question I had been pushing aside. Not whether the truth was true, but whether it would matter. What if I stood in that room, and 200 people looked at me the way they had looked at me my entire life, like I was the difficult one, the unstable one, the girl who couldn't stop pushing her father's buttons. Then my phone buzzed. Dylan, calling from a friend's number, his voice barely above a whisper. He made me try on the suit tonight. He measured my tie with an actual ruler. Sarah said if I say one wrong thing on Saturday, he's pulling every dollar out of my college account. A pause. And then, I can't keep doing this. I've never been okay. We've never been okay. In his voice, I heard myself at 14, sitting on a cold bathroom floor. I heard myself at 16, hiding cash in a tampon box. I heard myself at 18, carrying a suitcase through a kitchen while my mother washed a dish that was already clean. You won't have to smile on Saturday, I told him. I promise. The next afternoon, at 2 o'clock, my phone rang again. I'm about an hour out, said the voice on the other end. It belonged to my grandmother, Dorothy June Calloway. Grandma June, 72 years old, driving 2 hours on a Saturday to sit in the back of a church fellowship hall. Her voice carried the particular weight of someone who had been waiting a very long time to stop waiting. 16 years earlier, she had come for a weekend visit when I was 8 years old. I had reached up to take a glass from the cabinet, and my sleeve had slipped back, and June had seen the bruises before I could pull it down. She went straight to Carol. I stood in the next room and heard every word. Carol, I gave birth to you. Do not lie to me, Carol cried, but didn't leave. June called Child Protective Services herself. Robert handled it the way he handled everything, with handshakes and 30 years of goodwill. And after that, June was no longer welcome on Birchwood Drive. Not once in 16 years. I've been waiting a long time for someone to do what I didn't have the power to do back then, she told me. I'll be in that room, Sarah. Whatever happens. I told her I loved her. She told me to drive carefully. That was enough. Robert had built his stage carefully. Over 30 years, one handshake at a time. What he didn't know was that I was done letting him write the ending. The Cornerstone Baptist Fellowship Hall smelled like carnations and lemon polish. Round tables in white linen, candles at the centerpieces, and a gold banner across the front wall. Faith, family, service. 3 words I had lived underneath for 18 years. 200 people filled the room, the kind of crowd that runs a small town not through law but through reputation. Robert moved through it like he owned it. Navy suit, dark red tie, gold cufflinks catching the candlelight as he worked the room one handshake at a time. Carol stood beside him with her hands clasped and her eyes on the floor. I recognized that posture. She had been holding it for 28 years. Dylan sat near the front in a suit that wasn't his, and a tie that had been measured with a ruler. I walked in at 6:15. Robert crossed the room with his arms already open. There she is. Everybody, my daughter is here. He pulled me into a hug, and I felt his hands on my back. The same hands, the same back. And I stood completely still, arms at my sides. The manila envelope pressed against my hip, from inside my bag. Pastor Mark stepped to the podium. The room rose to its feet, and Robert accepted his award with his shoulders square and his chin lifted. "This past year tested my family," he said. "But my daughter came back, because that's what family does. Sarah, come on up here with your dad." 200 faces turned toward me. I stood up, walked to the stage, and when Robert put his arm around my shoulder, I reached up and gently lifted his hand and placed it back at his side. No drama, no raised voice, just that. The room went completely quiet, and in his eyes, for the first time in my life, I saw something I had never seen there before. Fear. I stepped to the microphone. "Thank you, Pastor Mark, for letting me stand here tonight. My father said I've been going through a hard time. He's right, but not for the reasons he's told you." I pulled out the manila envelope and spread 5 pages across the podium. I was taken to the emergency room 5 times before I turned 16. Every time my parents told the doctors I had fallen. Every time the physicians wrote something different in my chart. These are my medical records. I am not asking anyone to take my word for it. I am asking you to read. Robert's voice came sharp. "She's lying. She's been unstable for years." I reached into my bag, set a small Bluetooth speaker on the podium, and pressed play. What came out was not the voice Robert used at award ceremonies. It was the other one, low, cold, absolute, the one that lived behind closed doors. A sharp sound. Then Dylan's voice, broken. The room went silent, the way that only happens when 200 people stop breathing at the same time. A mother pulled her son against her chest. A deacon stood and walked out without looking at anyone. A man who had been at Robert's barbecue 2 days earlier sat frozen, not shocked, not angry, but wearing the expression of someone quietly dismantling everything he thought he knew. Then 3 people stood up. From the back of the room, Grandma June rose without walking forward, because she didn't need to. "My name is Dorothy June Calloway. I am Carol's mother. 16 years ago, I saw bruises on my 8-year-old granddaughter and called Child Protective Services myself." No one followed up, because Robert Hale knew everyone in this town. "Now you do too." She sat down. Then Dylan stood, trembling, hands pressed tight against his sides. "I'm Dylan. I'm 18. My father hits me. My sister is telling the truth." He sat back down and gripped his knees until his knuckles went white. Then Carol rose from the 3rd row, the woman who had spent 28 years making herself as small and silent as possible, and said 6 words to the room. "I stayed silent for too long. She's right." Then she pressed both hands over her face and wept. Pastor Mark stepped forward, his voice stripped of every trace of warmth. "Robert, I need to speak with the deacon board right now." When Robert reached for his arm, Mark stepped back. "Not right now." The life Robert had built came apart in 72 hours. Within 24, the deacon board voted unanimously to remove him. Not a single word in his defense from the men who had eaten at his table. Within 48, 2 major contracts were canceled. $195,000 for the church renovation, $110,000 for a county community center project. Both withdrawn with the same polite, devastating line, "We've decided to go in a different direction." Within 72 hours, I drove Carol and Dylan to the county courthouse. A judge listened to 4 minutes and 38 seconds of audio in her chambers and signed a protective order before lunch. Robert was ordered to vacate the house on Birchwood Drive, a house that had carried Carol's name on the deed since 1999, which he had treated as his alone for 27 years. His final act was to walk into Heritage Bank and drain $41,000 from Dylan's college savings account. He thought it was a punishment. What it actually was the last piece of evidence anyone needed. But Robert had miscalculated one thing: Grandma June. 5 years earlier, quietly and without telling a soul, she had opened a college savings account in Dylan's name, $200 a month from her late husband's pension, $13,500, waiting. And then the women of Cornerstone Baptist did something I did not expect. The same women who had brought casseroles to our house and called us a beautiful family organized a scholarship collection for Dylan. They passed an envelope at Sunday service, posted about it on the church page, and mailed personal checks. In 1 week, $9,200. Those same hands that had once applauded Robert Hale now signed their names on checks made out to his son. It wasn't charity, it was atonement. Combined with June's savings and financial aid, it was enough. The door stayed open. A year later, the house on Birchwood Drive was quieter and more itself than it had ever been. New wreath on the door, lawn mowed slightly unevenly by Dylan on weekends, and on the old white refrigerator, held up by a sunflower magnet, was a photo of me, a selfie after a 12-hour shift, scrubs wrinkled, tired but smiling. Carol had printed it at the CVS down the street. It was the first time a photograph of me had ever been on that refrigerator. I was 26 years old. Dylan called every Thursday. We talked about nothing important. It was the best part of my week. Carol was in therapy and had gotten her driver's license for the first time at 51. The day she passed, she sent me a photo of herself holding the card. The most unguarded smile I had ever seen on her face. Robert lived alone across town. He never apologized. I stopped waiting. One afternoon, I found Carol sitting at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where the old grill sat rusting at the legs. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment, not as a villain, not as someone I needed to excuse, but as a person who had been afraid for so long that fear had become her whole personality and silence her only language. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't need to know right now. But you stood up. In that room, in front of everyone, you stood up. That's the first step." I didn't hug her, though part of me wanted to. We just sat together in the kitchen that used to feel like a trap, and now just felt like a kitchen. The silence between us was ordinary. For the first time, it didn't mean anything was coming. If you are listening to this, and someone keeps telling you that you are the reason everything is broken, you are not. You have never been the reason. Silence is not loyalty. Leaving is not betrayal. And you do not owe anyone the version of yourself they broke and then blamed you for. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It is more like physical therapy. Some days you make progress, some days it hurts more than the day before, and you show up anyway, because staying still hurts more than moving forward. My name is Sarah. I am 26 years old. I still live in that studio apartment. I still have the $8 curtains that don't quite reach the bottom of the window, and for the first time in my life, when my phone rings, I don't flinch. That's enough.